So, like you said, my name's CJ Farrell. I'm one of the sales engineers for BirdDog, which, for those who have not heard, we're a NDI PTZ broadcast company that's actually based out of Australia in Melbourne. And so I'm one of the faces over in the United States, and I basically cover Texas and anything east of the Mississippi. I'm currently based out of Austin, Texas. So I basically deal remotely with people for anything workflow related that they're trying to do, from a one camera church to dealing with like ESPN or talking with the MLB teams or NHL teams, or even like the big streaming services with the capital letters that everyone knows. So kind of deal on a very wide spectrum, and the people that use NDI vary all over in terms of application. We usually see like house of worship. We usually see sports, broadcasts, AV, corporate. There's a lot of things that you can do with it, and it's still a very growing industry in the world. So I'll kind of just start with a brief background for those who don't know. What is NDI? It stands for Network Device Interface, and it's basically transporting audio and video over an Ethernet cable. So you guys are all used to plugging in your gaming systems with an HDMI cord or a camera with an HDMI cord. And NewTek, which is a company that's based out of San Antonio, Texas, they said, let's the inventor, whose name is Andrew Cross, basically delivered this audio and video over just an Ethernet cable. And so it takes everything that's good about SDI and HDMI, and it makes it flexible by putting it on a computer network. And we believe that it's the best balance of high quality, low latency, and manageable bandwidth. And it just allows it to flow over your network on a regular Ethernet cable. So yeah, you can add metadata to it. You can also have, for instance, PTZ control. You can send more than just audio and video. You can even power the device. So there's a lot of things that you can actually utilize within just your standard Ethernet cable, which for me, I hadn't heard about NDI until 3 years ago, and I didn't even realize that you could do power over an Ethernet cable or anything like that. So it's something that I thought was kind of archaic personally, and like I was like, why do I need that when I have Wi-Fi? I don't need to run cables, right? Those are lame. But anyway, it's a really cool protocol that people have started to adapt, and we're only in its 5th iteration. So it was invented in, I think it was 2015 or 2016, and it's only been around in the industry for 5 to 6 years. So people are still for sure learning about it, and more and more people are slowly adapting into the space, and they're kind of slowly migrating and leaving their analog video that you see in like HDMI and SDI, which is in most typical broadcasts. So now I want to talk about some of the advantages that NDI gives you. It's way higher in flexibility because, as I mentioned, if you get it on a computer network, anyone else on that computer network can now see that video signal, which is great. Normally, if you run an SDI or an HDMI cable, it's point A to point B and you're done. All right, there's no processing happening anywhere. So NDI links every device that is visible on the same network or a VLAN, and it's bi-directional, so you can actually send it both ways, audio and video. And then it's format agnostic, so it doesn't care what frame rate it is. So some devices, if you guys dabble into like hardware switchers, they can be very particular about what frame rate you're trying to send over a camera or a computer. And NDI doesn't care, which is awesome. So you just send that signal, and then it's a lossless standard, so it's higher quality. Full bandwidth NDI, which is what BirdDog talks about, and I'll get into the difference there. It's similar to a ProRes 422 format for anyone who's done like video editing or something like that. That's a pretty high quality signal that runs around like 100 megabits per second. So it's a pretty big beefy signal. Like I said, ease of access. And then the cool thing is PoE, which I didn't really know was a thing, and I use it every day now. Power over Ethernet. And it's basically just utilizing a switch that has power over Ethernet. There's PoE, PoE Plus, and there's even PoE Plus Plus, which is not a great name, but you can basically power any device that takes it over just a switch. And then NDI is what enables things like we have our BirdDog Cloud, where we can transport NDI signal from one network to any other network in the world. And I'll show an example of that here at the end of pulling like a camera from Australia. Even though it's nighttime over there, we'll still be able to get the gist of it. So then I want to talk about what are some of the challenges of it. So as I said, people are slowly getting into it. There's still a learning curve that comes with NDI. And the biggest thing is because it is networking. And not all of us have networking backgrounds, especially when we're, wanting to be cinematographers or live, broadcast TDs or anything like that. So you do need to have a little bit of background knowledge and kind of know what you're getting into. So I wrote here the TCP IPv4, which is what NDI runs on right now. It's designed for multi-user access. And the reason why that's a challenge is because if you have a video feed on a network and you don't have any type of restrictions or management, anyone that logs into that network can see that feed, and you might not want that. And with like a PTZ camera, what's really cool is if you log in, you can control it like, over a device like your phone or a computer. So you have to be careful about how you manage the access to it. There's also no automatic data separation. So if you do end up pulling that feed, that's going to run on your network. So if 20 people all of a sudden pull an NDI feed, it could basically bog down your whole network. And there's no automatic bandwidth control. So these things are, blasting out 100 megabits, 120 megabits a second. And so it's a pretty heavy signal. And with NDI, also think you guys are all familiar with like network speeds when you go to speedtest.com and hit it and see, you have like 3 upload speed and you're pissed. The bit rates that we're talking about for NDI are local. So it's not relevant to your speed test. It's relevant to what your switch and your router can handle. So most people will get a gigabit network, so 1,000 megabits. And then as we get into NDI, we're starting to see more people use 10 gigabit networks, which is awesome. And I'll show the bandwidth on the next slide just to give you guys an idea of how this thing scales. This next thing is, I promise, the most technical I'm going to get in this. It's talking about the 2 forms of NDI. So there's what's called NDI HX, and then there's full NDI. Now, BirdDog mainly utilizes full NDI, and a lot of products out there will utilize HX. And there's a couple pros and cons for each. NDI HX is like H.264 compression. I don't know if you guys have ever done streaming to like YouTube or something, but you can choose what codec you send it in, and H.264 is kind of like the standard one. So like a 1080p 60 stream is like you can get it out at 6 megabits and you're fine. So the difference between full and HX is 15:1. So if I have a 6 megabit HX stream, that's going to be around 120 megabits on full NDI. So a huge difference. So if you go into something and are trying to figure out your workflow and you don't know the difference or don't account for it, you could screw yourself. And I've had a lot of people that I've talked to that were like, hey, why is this? I have like a gig of video data on my network. And we've had some people like in casinos, for instance, that are using cameras that they like the BirdDogs or they like a full NDI thing, but their IT department doesn't like seeing all that data on their network. So that's another challenge that can come up. And BirdDog is working right now in like our product line to also be able to offer HX, which that will be kind of like the first history first to be able to switch between the two. Most people use the HX because it's a little simpler, and then BirdDog makes its own chips to enable the full NDI. And then a strong network backbone is needed for success. As I mentioned, you can't just kind of like dive in and, if you're doing like one camera, you can be fine. But if you're trying to do like a show with like maybe 6 cameras or 7, send video out to like 3 screens, you're going to want to make sure you plan what you're doing. Bandwidth management can pose a challenge if you're restricted to a 1 gigabit network, or if you're in a casino and you don't like it. You want to avoid the use of unmanaged switches, and I know this is not an IT class or anything, but an unmanaged switch is basically what we call a dummy switch, where it'll take an Ethernet connection and the router will send it whatever IP address it deems. There's no management whatsoever, and NDI functions a lot better on managed switches. And then we like full bandwidth because it's the best quality and lowest latency. Full NDI is 1 frame of delay in comparison to something like HDMI. So 1 frame of delay, if I'm doing a 60 FPS stream, is about 16 milliseconds. So if we were talking or watching on a screen, you cannot perceivably tell a difference of that until it's like around 25 or 30 milliseconds. So like I said, my background, my first 5 years were at a company called Flow Sports in Austin, where I basically traveled around and set up portable streams. And Bird Dog was the first product. It was actually this little converter here on my camera. I think hopefully you guys can still see that. I have my stickers on it from when I used it. I could actually use this and pair it with SDI and HDMI cameras. So I was using NDI and SDI HDMI at the same time, and they can collaborate with each other, which is awesome. So if I have a camera that I need to get further out, I can run like a couple switches and some Ethernet lines, and I can reach. The HX, you can use it, but I noticed sometimes it would be, I put 3 frames here, which is like optimal, but if I'm like taking it over Wi-Fi or something, it could be like 3 seconds behind. And I used to film track and field, so people would go around the track, and if I switch to a camera that's 2 or 3 seconds behind, or even 1 second, I can't use it because the person's in a different spot when I go to that camera. So those are some of the challenges with NDI. And then as I mentioned, the bit rate is different than like your upload speed and your download speed. It's just the local data going through the switch, going through your network, your local network. So the lowest for a full bandwidth is 720p 30. I think actually 720i would be a little bit less, but around 65 megabits per camera. So on a 1 gigabit network, you can get around 12 signals, and this kind of just cascades down. 1080p 60 is still kind of the standard for people that are streaming, and that's around 135 megabits max. So usually when people ask me, I'll say, yeah, you can do like 7 camera signals, or 4 cameras and send out to 3 screens, and you're going to be fine. And then 4K is a beast, and that can spike up to 250 megabits. So anytime someone tells me 4K cameras, I'm going to tell them they need a 10 gigabit network. And then another thing that I think I personally find interesting, because I'm a nerd about this stuff, is cables. And so it's neat being able to use Ethernet cable because they kind of don't have a drawback really. HDMI can go around 50 to 100 feet. Usually when you get like to 100 feet, you have to have a 1 direction cable too, and they're pretty finicky. An HDMI connection can move around. You try to avoid that on like broadcast sets or especially sports, because if you run a 100-foot cable and that thing gets like touched, it's probably gonna blink or disconnect for a second. SDI is kind of like the gold standard of connections. For those that don't know what an SDI cable is, it is a coaxial cable, like the cable port that you found in your apartment or your home that you're like, why do I need this? I don't want to use it. It's the little screw-in connector, and it's pretty robust. And a lot of cameras, if you look up SDI cameras, it'll be a little lock port that comes out of the camera. And you can run those up to about 330 feet on 1 cable. You can also like boost any of these things, which is great. And then the last one that I don't have labeled here for those who get into like truck sports or big productions, there's also a cable called Triax, which is basically a beefed up Ethernet cable. It provides audio, video, and power and comms. So that thing is like a huge cable. I used to roll those I went to school at Baylor University in Waco, Texas, for those who don't know. It's a pretty small state that you don't really want to go unless you're going to the school. But there, when we would film sports, we would roll out these Triax cables, and they'd be like 100 feet, and they'd weigh like 50 pounds. So they're pretty beefy and definitely not portable if you're in something other than like a production truck. And then Ethernet cabling, you have different variations. There's Cat 5 up to Cat 6A, and those basically are just the ratings for how much data it can send. So Cat 6A is kind of like the new minimum that we like to tell everyone, because that can go up to the 330 feet, and then it can do 10 gigabit. So you're going to have no problems utilizing those cables, especially connecting from like a switch to your computer. The last thing is fiber, which fiber is pretty awesome. For those who haven't dealt, you can run a fiber cable for 20 miles and it'll transport the signal. The neat thing about fiber is you can convert things to it. So you guys have all probably heard of Google Fiber. It's exactly what it is. It's fiber cables that are going miles and miles long. And that's how they transport their speedy internet. I have Google Fiber at my apartment here and I love it. So I'm thankful that they can run those cables, those long distances. The neat thing is you can get converters for them. So you can convert SDI to fiber and back, or HDMI to fiber and back, and then you can convert Ethernet to fiber and back. So they have these little box converters that you can have. So I could have, an HDMI camera and run it a mile. We used to film cross country that I did, which was a pain, and we would set up cameras around a 6-mile course, and we would run fiber to connect each cameras when I started. And I'll show pictures of kind of that setup and how we adapted into going more to an NDI and video over IP route. So the next thing I wanted to talk about was some switchers. So for those who ever want to go into some type of live broadcast usage, or these can be anywhere basically where you're doing some type of show. There's two types in the industry. There's software switchers with things like OBS, which I'm sure you guys have all heard of. That's a free software you can download, and a lot of Twitch streamers will use it. It's free. It's definitely the most not lacking in features. It's the least reliable of these, but it works for what you want to do. It's still pretty new with NDI, so I personally avoid using OBS. The NDI plugin is not great. And then my favorite one is vMix, which is this picture right here. For those who don't know, vMix is a switcher, a software switcher that runs on Windows computers, and it's based out of Australia as well. So they're neighbors with BirdDog, and I didn't even realize that they were neighbors when I discovered both products, but they kind of pair nicely with each other, and vMix can accept NDI feeds. On a computer, you can put SDI capture cards. For gamers out there, you can put HDMI capture cards, and you can basically get all your sources into a software switcher as a computer. So that's kind of what I transitioned to. This ATEM over here on the right, which is made by Blackmagic. They're a pretty popular entry-level hardware switcher, which a hardware switcher just has the analog SDI and HDMI inputs in the back. It cannot do NDI. You can't plug an Ethernet cable into it and expect to get cameras into it. Whereas something on the left here in vMix, my computer that sits on my desk here, I can bring in my cameras, which I'll show you one of them. Everything comes through just an Ethernet cable, including my internet connection. So I literally just need one cable. And so I'll show you some pictures in a little bit here, and you can just use a laptop, an Ethernet cable, and then you're off to the races. Over in the hardware switcher land, you have Roland, which is a pretty popular, very entry-level hardware switcher, Blackmagic ATEM, and then the big boys, Ross, and then Grass Valley. Those are kind of like the ones you're going to see in big production trucks. This bottom one's a little overwhelming. That's a Grass Valley switcher. Those cost a lot of money. I remember at Baylor, they got a brand new Grass Valley switcher, and they implemented a rule of no drinks. And I asked, why is that? And they're like, well, before you got here, someone spilled their coffee on the old switcher. And apparently that switcher was $55,000 just for the switcher. So don't bring drinks around hardware switchers, and also don't bring drinks around software switchers either, because you don't want to mess up your computer. But a computer is much cheaper than $55,000 last I checked, even though graphics cards are hard to get. So yeah, so those are kind of the two things that are out there. Both have pros and cons. Software switchers are a lot more flexible. Like in vMix, I can bring in like YouTube videos live and click around in a YouTube video. I can have remote callers come in. There's so many things that you can do, which is why I think it's a great product and a great route of software switching. And it's something that you guys can all download OBS and start messing with, and you can stream from it too. Something like a hardware switcher, you have to still output that signal to another computer, and then that computer streams. So you kind of have to add more pieces to the puzzle. The Pro it's more reliable because window or computers crash, right? So you can have Windows updates or something like that. For the most part, they're very reliable, but you can overload it. Like if I bring in like 20 cameras all of a sudden, OBS is not going to handle that, and then it's going to crash. A hardware switcher is pretty limited. So what limited means is it's not going to crash. You could leave that thing on for hours and you're going to have no issues. The thing that I still will use hardware switchers for is if I have to do what we call IMAG, which is going out to a big display. So if I'm doing live sports or some type of broadcast and I need to get to a huge projector or a huge jumbotron, I'll probably need a hardware switcher because that doesn't have any latency because it's just an analog pass-through. If I use a software switcher like vMix, every time I bring a signal into my computer, it will delay it by around 3 frames or so, usually like 60 milliseconds. And if I pop up something on a screen that's like 60 milliseconds or 80 milliseconds behind, people are going to notice that. And so that's kind of where you need an analog switcher. And even in some places, like if you guys have been to football stadiums where you hear like the PA announcer say something and then it takes like a couple seconds for it to get to the other side, that's just because of the cable length runs. And so they can suffer similar things, but for the most part, hardware switchers are great for doing any type of like live projection that you want to show. So that's the switchers. And then just kind of want to talk about what like I do at BirdDog and what we make. These are some of the products that we have. In this top left, these are called NDI converters. This is what started me on the journey. This is an older one, and this is the one that you see in the pictures. What these do is it takes any type of HDMI or SDI signal and it converts it to NDI, which is great if I have, let's say, like a cinema camera, or like a what is it, the Sony AS7 IIIs that are everywhere that people keep using, those little mirrorless DSLR cameras. I can go HDMI into this converter, and then I can pull the feed in over NDI. So that's a great option if you want to get into NDI and get any type of traditional camera on the network or even a laptop or something. We also do software, which I'll show an example of one of the softwares in this. We have like a comm software. We have our cloud software. We have a thing that can do multi-views. So I can do like basically how we see in Teams with multiple boxes. I could put multiple cameras in those and customize that. For those into audio, we also can convert Dante to NDI and vice versa. Dante is basically the gold standard right now of getting audio onto a network, whereas NDI is more focused on video, but we can also do audio as well. And then on the right is our cameras. So these are the PTZ cameras. This top left one is not a PTZ camera. It's a little box camera. These things have been really cool. We've been throwing these like up on ceilings, player cameras for like Twitch is using some of them for like CSGO tournament that Red Bull did was using these as player cameras. So we work with people that are utilizing those. And then these kind of just go from 1080p up to 4K. And then the other thing that we do is like AV stuff. So for like corporate offices, we have a TV or a chip right here on the left called SDM that can go into a TV, and you can plug that into the TV and then you can send any NDI signal to it. The other thing that's cool is we have this wall plate, which this literally, like it sounds, goes into an outlet, like a 2-gang box, and you can plug HDMI in, or you can come out. So you can choose which one you want, and you can send, like in this picture on the right, I can have a computer go into like a conference room, little fancy wall plug, and then someone on the other side of the network can grab that. These are some of the pictures of when we've used it. So the chip's on the bottom left, slots into the TV, and then as you can see up here on the top left, we just have that little box camera up top, and you end up just having 2 Ethernet cables in this whole setup, and that's it. So it's a pretty clean setup for people that want to do like corporate signage or something like that. And then like an example that I would send to someone working, if they asked me like, hey, I want to get 5 TVs, or hey, I want to get 15 TVs, I would basically make sure that they're set up for success by having the right switches in place. This is a PoE switch from Netgear that we like to recommend. So that can go up to 5 TVs. And then over here, if they have more, like we said, our bandwidth of have more than 7 devices, I need to go 10 gig. So from these, I'll actually set it up to they'll individually handle that data. So that's just kind of something we have to think about. And then the next, I want to show one of the softwares I talked about. We have one on our PTZs that you can control the cameras and change the color on them. And then we also just introduced tracking, which is pretty fun. So for free, you can add tracking to it. And this is this is our other sales engineer, and he's playing guitar. And you can see the little red box around him, and these are on 3 PTZ cameras, and then these are just kind of autonomously following him. So people like NASA and stuff are making their own tracking softwares on PTZ cameras that you can remotely control. So there's a lot of cool applications people are doing, and you can basically simulate, having multiple camera ops without even needing them there. So just kind of showing you how that can track, and this is just going to get better as time goes on. People are going to make more tracking stuff, and this kind of is all just in the NDI world. I wanted to show a couple examples of NDI workflows, just because it can be difficult to picture sometimes. These are kind of 2 of the most I guess basic ones that I can show. On the left would be 3 PTZ cameras plugged into a switch, and then all you need is 1 Ethernet cable from the switch into your switcher. This is a software switcher right here called a TriCaster. For those who have heard, it's made by NewTek. They're that company that invented NDI. So literally these are the only cables that I need in this whole setup, right? Because remember we talked about PoE? The PTZ cameras and that little controller in the bottom left here will power up, send their video, send their audio, let you control them just over the 1 Ethernet cable, which for people that don't like rolling up cables and stuff, that's a game changer and one of the big reasons why people are kind of going this way. And like on my cameras, like I don't even know where my DC power cord is, right? I just plug in the Ethernet cable, it boots up, and I'm ready to go. If I want to mix and match a little bit, let's say I don't want to just do PTZ cameras on the right here, I can do a little more fun things. Like I can have 2 PTZ cameras. I can bring in a traditional camera into that NDI converter we talked about, where I can go HDMI in. I can then receive that camera signal. And then you see this little TV monitor. When we talked about it being bidirectional, I can actually then send like a video output or my program feed to maybe like my talent or something who's like watching it live, and then I can send a video feed out to something. So it'll go Ethernet cable out of the switch, and then it'll go out to the TV. So you can utilize it in both directions. Kind of like some example pictures. This is using an 8 camera show. These are just kind of 2 computer chassis, and you can see on the left is a replay machine. On the right, this thing I think is handling 8 cameras. It's also distributing to a Jumbotron, and we have some SDI routers at the top here because their Jumbotron did not take NDI. It did not take HDMI, it needed SDI, and it was a little too latent coming out of it. So that is one of the disadvantages, and why we can incorporate analog switchers with our software switchers so that we can send out basically not latent video signals. On the right, it's kind of just showing like how you plug it in. So this was at the Baylor track and field. This is my traditional camcorder. I had it going HDMI out and into this little converter, and then SDI into it. You can see the little blue locking cable there. And then Ethernet cable went back to my little setup, and that was it. So makes it much more streamlined. This case on the left is what I can do with a NDI setup. This little case I could bring on an airplane that I did, and you can do a 2 camera shoot with commentators, anything you want in that realm, with replay as well, all just in this one case because I'm utilizing a laptop. and a switch, I'd take the two cameras into little bird dog converters into the switch, and I have a 2-camera show. And I'll show a picture here in a little bit of what a 2-camera show used to look like for me at Flow Sports before I kind of made this little travel kit. This thing, when we used this over in Europe for like a basketball tournament with the NCAA one time, you can see this poor quality picture on the right is a Snapchat this one of my coworkers sent to me that says, "I seriously love this setup." And he had a 2-camera setup with just his laptop and a little screen with his replay controller. And so it's really nice to be able to just kind of condense that workflow and be able to travel with something that you could take on a plane. Couple other examples. I did a show in Costa Rica on this top left where I actually had my commentators remote. One guy was in California, the other was in Pittsburgh. I had it to where I sent them each other's pictures so they could see each other, and then they were watching the program feed. They were commentating on basketball. I think this game was Colorado, and they were just beating up on the local Costa Rica pro teams. Bottom left is using vMix software switcher. This was a live by live country concert that we did on a rooftop bar, and you can kind of see this was a 4-camera shoot, and you can see it's just like a computer tower, and that's it. I got 3 monitors connected to it, and I'm ready to roll. And then you're just using a keyboard and mouse, so it's really easy to travel with. On the right here, I like this picture. I think this was from Harvard, if I'm not mistaken, and this was their commentator table. And you see the little bird dog camera on the tripod legs. You see the little bird dog converter to the left of that. And that's what's sending their program feed so they can see what they're watching. And then they just have these little cough box buttons to take their audio in. Now let's talk about some not so NDI enabled workflow. This is kind of what I came from. This is simple 2-camera shoots. So comparison of that little case that you saw, this is what I used to have to bring, which was 3 laptops, that little travel rack, and a monitor. And because I had to have 1 laptop dedicated to streaming, I had to have 1 laptop dedicated to switching, and then I had another laptop dedicated for replay. So it used to be a pretty big pain. On this bottom left, this was me setting it up outside, and it just is kind of a nest of cables. Up here on the right was an indoor track that was a 3-camera shoot. And so you can kind of just see how overwhelming it can get compared to this little setup, which this setup can do more than these setups. The first setup can bring in commentators, it can bring in YouTube videos, it can create animated graphics. And like ATEMs, I was making PNGs on Photoshop at like 1 a.m. So there's a lot more things that you can utilize by going into the IP world. This was another truck from like cross country. You can see it was great. We had 8 cameras, but it's just such a mess cable wise coming into the hardware switchers on that right picture. And then I think I had to have just a MacBook to control the switcher itself. That was it. So a whole computer, a $2,000 MacBook is dedicated to just switching it. Whereas I could build a $3,000 computer with vMix and do it all on the one thing. On the left is what it looked like before IP. On the right is after we went to IP, condensed from, 6 laptops to 2 computers. So just flexibility, condensing is kind of what it's been going to, and more people are adapting to this condensed workflow that gives them more flexibility. The last thing on the list that I had, and Angela or Sam, correct me if I'm running out of time or anything.
You're good.
Cool. The last things is cloud, which cloud is a platform where we can take NDI video signals and we can send them anywhere in the world that we want. Now, this is really powerful for if I have people with multiple, let's say, business offices, or I want someone to send cameras to, like we did a show in Houston where someone sent 3 PTZ cameras to the convention center in Houston, the George R. Brown, and they had their control hub in Houston. And actually, now I see, Sam, you have the ATEMs behind you too, so I don't even, you know some of the pros and cons, but in Houston, they sent the cameras back to their control room, and the guy could actually control the cameras remotely. And those feeds get sent over SRT. For those who aren't familiar with SRT, it's basically the newer version of RTMP. RTMP was designed to send text messages and emails. It wasn't designed to send videos. So SRT is a point-to-point connection that is becoming more mainstream, and it's lower latency. So you can send an SRT feed in like 100 millisecond, 200 millisecond delay. Basically whatever the ping time is from point A to point B. So like Texas to Arizona is like 50 milliseconds. So I could, get like 100 millisecond signal, no problem. The other thing that we do with NDI is Cloud Connect, which this is something that we're rolling out very soon. I have like betas on my phone. It's sending these NDI signals to things like phones, computers, web browsers, basically having access for these video signals wherever you want them. It can pop up on a Apple TV. You actually, I think, see in that top picture, you can have an Apple TV, Samsung, and basically being able to use the remote and click which NDI feed you want to see. So, we're starting to get into the territory where it's not just like cameras, but it's like content, right? Where we're delivering video. We can send movies wherever we wanted if we so choose. I mess around. I just got a little 8-week-old puppy, and I've been streaming him out to my friends over SRT. And I was like, hey, look, follow this link. You can check out the little puppy. My wife's working in the other room right now, so I can't show that, unfortunately, today. But yesterday I used him as an example. Today I'll pull a camera from Australia to show you guys. So let me stop sharing for a second. That's pretty much the end of the PowerPoint traditional stuff that I have. Let's see. And I kind of want to just show the cloud stuff to wrap, and then feel free, obviously, I'll take any questions you guys have. I know it's a lot to soak in. Let me share my screen again. Okay. So this is our whole grid, which actually it's a lot less sources than I'm usually seeing. The support office, this guy's actually doing a Twitch show right now, which I will show that, but I won't move his camera because I think he's live. But what I can do is I can pop open my BirdDog Cloud, and you can see right here on the bottom that CJF home appears. And so now that's connecting to the world. And then my P100 camera, I'm gonna go ahead and pull that up to show you guys. If I use something like NDI's Studio Monitor, which this is free software that basically anyone can get. Right now you see this great picture of my wall. On this, I can use this little joystick and control my camera. And then here we are. So this signal is coming into my computer fully over NDI, right? All it is an Ethernet cable that's powering it up, and it's pretty awesome in that flexibility. With this program or any PTZ, you can set like presets for them. So I can make this like preset 1. And then I can go like over here. This is preset 2. And if I want to go back to what I had, I just click 1 and it flips back to that preset that I had. So you can have people that are controlling this remotely, or if they plug any computer up on the network, they can have access to that camera feed, right? Let's see, focus, there we go. You can zoom in and out, and then you can control the focus. So this all is just being controlled over the Ethernet cable, which is great. And if you want, you can step it up and you can use something like a keyboard. Some people like to have the analog control. This thing can do, it can do up to 255 cameras. It can do, I think, up to like 255 presets. But you can utilize something like this if you want. So now what I'm going to do is show you guys me pulling a camera from somewhere else in the world. So this support office is located in Michigan. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to come down to his transmitter. I'm going to go over to CJ. And then I can actually choose what bit rate I send the camera at, which is really nice. So I can customize it. Maybe if I'm on a hotspot or someone doesn't have great internet, I can do like 3 megabits. Or if they have a great connection, I could do like 10 megabits or something. I'm going to do 3 just because I think he is live streaming on Twitch, and I don't want to disturb that. So let's do Twitch camera and then port 5557. We're not going to get into all that today, but I'll hit connect, and then you see this little link, and then now that camera is sending me information. And then I'm also going to pull to show you guys. Oh, NVENC not supported. He doesn't have a GPU. Hold on. He uses this little NUC computer, so I can't use that. Let's do this one. 3 megabits, H.264. And then I'm going to take his P200. So in this dropdown, I can actually see every single NDI source on his network in Michigan. So this is pretty cool. So if I have multiple cameras or multiple switchers, I can actually pull each NDI feed that I want. I'm going to do this P200. I think that's what he's streaming on. Let's see. Actually, he's not live. That's cool. Oh, I forgot it. They're snowed in. Okay, maybe we can move this camera around. So let me connect. Now, if I just go back to my NDI Studio monitor and I right click and then I go to my desktop, let's see, I'll probably have to restart this. Oh, there it is. So Bird Dog P200 on the port. No, their lights are off. Dagnabbit. I wanted to show that. I can see like an object down there. Hold on. Let's see. I don't know what's coming off this. We can basically try to grab sources as we go and see. Let's lame. That is underwhelming. Usually we have a thing on in Australia that way I can pull. Let me try one more. I don't even know what this is. vmix output. Let's see what if that is something. Save. Okay, connected. Then we open this up again. Okay, I don't know what the heck this is. It's like some fairy tale rabbit thing. But anyway, you can see I'm pulling that video signal over, and people will utilize this to pull their cameras over, send their cameras somewhere else. And it's a pretty cool way to control your content. This is a vmix output from, I have no idea where this is from, to be honest. But they're spitting out some type of rabbit village, the whole thing. I don't even know what that is. Looks like Winnie the Pooh. Anyway, the last thing I'll show before questions is I can do the Cloud Connect, which is going to like a web URL. I'll show that with my camera. If I do my P100, I can do the bitrate. I can choose a room to send it to, and then CJ connect. There we go. That's connected. So now, if I come into Cloud Connect Streams and I open up CJ, I have a pin code that I can give people. I can change it at will. All I have to do is send them the link, and they don't have to download a program. They don't have to download anything. And then if I hit play, there we go. So this is my low latency. This is about 1 or 2 frames behind my like USB camera. So we can utilize people to access this on any web browser that they wish. And it's a great way to distribute content. And then the last thing I will show, sorry, my Twitch started auto playing. The last thing I'll show is I'm going to pull it up on my phone too. So let me pause this. Video monitor again. So you guys can see what I'm looking at. And then now I have the camera on my phone too. Turn it down a little. And so now you can actually get this is the latency that you're dealing with. And what's neat is on this phone, if I slide up here, I can move my camera around, right? So we can have people remote in from wherever they want. Remember those presets we had earlier? If I want to go over to spot 2, I don't know where that's going. Spot 1. Oh boy. I think I set different presets on this guy. But you can still set the same, you can set presets on the phone and call them. So there's a lot of control customizability. There we go. Bring us around. And you can do that on an iOS device or an Apple TV. But that's just kind of one of the advantages of like having it on IP, is being able to control that from wherever you want. But yeah, so I think that's about kind of all I had to show you guys. And I guess, Sam, if there's anything else that you wanted me to touch on more, or if you guys had questions, I'm happy to answer anything I can.
You hit pretty much it. One of the big things I think for them is being at a college campus. You know, most college campuses got $100,000 live trucks.
Mm-hmm.
In NDI, I know for our company, we're getting rid of those live trucks, and they're going to NDI because they can put those cameras at every arena, every conference room in the school, and they can have one central control room where they're pulling up their stuff. So it's a big changer for them going into the industry right now.
Yeah, people are, the whole wave for sure in live sports was the big multi-million-dollar trucks. And especially when COVID started, and I know that's everyone's favorite little start of a story. When COVID started, they had those trucks sitting there and they couldn't do anything. They didn't have people coming to these shows, and it didn't make sense to, spend thousands and thousands of dollars on gas and manpower when they were gonna, maybe not even have a show, or the show might get canceled. So when people started messing more with like NDI sending video feeds, remote commentators became a huge thing, and it's still a huge thing. And that's kind of plays into the NDI world, where you'll send, for instance, that little thing I showed you where I pulled up a web browser page. Someone could send the basketball game and the commentator can pull that up. The commentator can then talk about it. And you can use something like Zoom or Teams, but the audio quality is obviously not quite as good as you might like it to be. So things like SRT is where that comes in, and basically having a higher quality audio signal is very important. So like NBA even has used remote commentators in real games, not just like Summer League. And at Flow Sports, we were doing commentators all the time. Like that Costa Rica picture I sent, instead of paying, maybe like $1,500, $2,000 just for travel for these commentators to come down, we can say, hey, you want to wake up in your own bed and, drink some coffee and commentate and watch some basketball? Like, who's going to say no to that, right?
You don't even got to wear pants. That's the plus.
Yeah. Yeah, if you want to put them on camera, you can tell them to dress up. But in some cases, you don't even show them, but it really obviously adds that element from the most beginning, like high school sports, all the way up to professional. Everyone's utilizing remote commentators because, it's just a way that you can get the best of the best without, sacrificing if they're going to be there. To your point of production trucks, we also did, and this is hard to take pictures of, but we did the PBA bowling draft at Flow Sports, and we actually had everyone in a Zoom room like this. And then we had our director in his house. We had our replay guy in his house. We had our graphics guy in his house. They were all talking to each other just over Discord, and we were sending their SRT feeds to each other so they could all see what each other are doing, talk to each other, and we were producing the show remotely, which was awesome. It's hard to take pictures of that, obviously. I learned that people like in esports, like League of Legends, if you guys have heard of that game, like they use that exact same model where they had a replay. Their shoutcasters were remoted in. I remember watching some of their struggles when they started. Like it's a learning curve. Like some of them would fizzle out on their connections. And now it's like rock solid, and they can still incorporate someone remotely, and then they can, have them talk to someone in a real studio, right? You can transport people places. The big wave right now is like green screen 3D stages, where you can basically make a full custom stage and have that, be where the commentators are talking. That's been a big thing with like things like Unreal Engine, that you can create your own virtual stage. We've also seen where one person will be in Texas, the other person will be over in New York, and they're both sitting behind green screens, and you can teleport them to be in the same room talking to each other. So that's kind of like the big wave right now that's coming along. I'm trying to think.
And that's what we're utilizing it for. Our company, that's what this whole system is back here. We can sit at our house and I can direct a corporate conference. I can do a church broadcast, a funeral stream, whatever, and I don't ever got to leave anymore. It's changed the whole world.
Yeah,
now there's
absolutely.
NDI, and then there's that SMPTE 2010.
Yes.
How big of a difference are those, in your opinion?
Between NDI and SMPTE 10?
Yeah.
So SMPTE 10, I didn't talk about that because it gets a little confusing and hairy, I think. Like if you look up SMPTE 10 on YouTube video, my favorite is it says the quick and easy explanation of SMPTE 2110 in 60 minutes. And so that's the simple explanation, is sitting there for 60 minutes learning. SMPTE 10 is very reliable. It's very robust. But once again, it comes into that limited category a little bit because it is transporting it over IP, but now you're kind of starting to talk like proprietary stuff.
Yes.
And so there's still limitations into that. People, I think I've talked to people in the NFL that are using SMPTE 2110, and they, I'll talk to them. They're like, yeah, NDI sounds great, but I'm locked in with my, multi-million-dollar SMPTE 2110 infrastructure. I'm like, oh, that sucks. Like, sorry to hear it. Let us know in 3 years when that's obsolete, and we'll talk. So that's kind of like the SMPTE 2110 story. And I don't know if you have talked about that with them. But yeah, that's like the high
network guy coming in, and network people are SMPTE. So I'm trying to teach them there's multiple ways out there nowadays.
Yes. NDI for sure is like the more, I guess, scrappy way is what, just because it's new. People are still, adapting into it, but big players are messing with it. Like I remember there was an AV Media West conference in 2019 that I went to, that one of my friends spoke at from Flow Sports, and he was the NDI guy, and then it was like Fox, NFL Network, and NBA. All three were, or the NFL guy was like, yeah, I just invested in SMPTE 2110 across all of our stadiums. I was like, cool, that's great. The NBA guy was kind of in the middle. He didn't really know. He didn't have an opinion. He's like, I'm not really, each stadium does their own thing. I don't really care. And 2 years later, they're using like bird dog cameras for all their summer league games and some of their real games as like ref cameras. Yep. And so they're already utilizing like bird dog technology and NDI technology in their shows. So it's not just like the thing that just a church or a 2-camera shoot's using. People in professional sports at the top level are also using it.
Yeah, I know a lot of like my mom's school, they put bird dog cameras in for all the teachers so they could teach remotely and in person at the same time. And the cameras got tracking software in them. It almost eliminates the operator. Now, when you guys are doing tracking software, are you working a lot with that development? Because I know a lot of our clients are really invested in that whole idea of the cameras following them, all that kind of stuff.
Yeah, so I wanted to show an example. I literally had this pulled up as you're saying that. Tracking software.
Yesterday, wasn't it?
Say what?
Was that yesterday? I was watching that. I was talking to the guys from NASA.
Oh, you did? Yeah, I'm speaking with them today at 3 p.m. We're gonna try to throw a bird dog camera out there. This is their tracking software that they've developed, and it works over Visca IP, and they're hoping to transport into NDI. Right now, their problem is finding a camera that can stick out in the environment, which is at the South Texas beach. It doesn't get cold, but it's sand, it's wind, it's rain, and Anyway, the guy that I spoke with 2 days ago, his name was John. He described this, and I was like, it went right over my head. Like I was like, it's a little too much info for me. They basically have to have the tracking software change for when the rocket turns,
Yep.
and they almost have to have it do like a hard reset. But really, what you're watching is just an automated Axis security camera following this thing. Axis security cameras are pretty cheap, just straight out of China security cams. You can see like it's having focus issues. That's also because like the cloud smoke from the spaceship. But people are doing really cool. There we go. So like, look, that's a completely different shape you're looking at.
Yes.
So right now people are kind of writing their own tracking stuff to answer your question, Sam. And they're able to just incorporate it right into anything that's controlled over NDI, IP, or VISCA IP is still the most popular for sure.
Yeah, I'm trying to get these guys to come talk to my students about how they're working and developing all that. So we're actually trying to score Elon Musk for like 2 minutes too. But so we're trying.
Boy. Yeah, these guys work with SpaceX out there, and so if they end up using our camera, I'm gonna try to go out there too. You can see like, look, this is literally just like it's just a plume of smoke. It's nothing to even see. The other the other use case, and this is on a bird dog camera, is people are doing track and field. So this is a PTZ following these guys. This was like their first iteration test from last year. They were utilizing chips in the runner's bibs to put them where they wanted, and they could literally live select how many chips they wanted to show in the frame. So it definitely struggled, I think, when we were talking about it, like when it was like this super wide shot. But when they narrowed it down to like a couple runners, and I'll speed up a little here, at this point, you can kind of see it's getting a little more zoomed in. And then they chose 2 runners to follow. And then now you're kind of smoothly going down the home stretch. And this is a robot. No one's operating this.
Yep.
So you could have a camera that sits out overnight, and it's showtime. You turn it on remotely. You start the stream, and it's doing this. And you could sit in your pajamas and monitor the feed.
And that's what I was trying to talk about. You might not be a traditional camera operator, but knowing the technical side of this nowadays is becoming more and more and more important because the jobs are changing in our market pretty rapidly here.
Yes. The environment is like in technology, it's like, everything is like a 2 to 3 year life cycle. Yep. And with tracking, everyone's kind of developing their own thing to make that next, groundbreaking thing. Because if you think about it, if I could make this software, and every school that was interested in like doing their track or their football, like if you had programs that could do all that, you can install those in schools across the country as permanent installs, and you're going to be set. The other camera or with that SpaceX thing, I'll show you the camera that we're going to send out there.
What?
So this thing weighs 35 pounds. So it's a little bit heavier. This thing's a tank. You could probably hit this with a baseball bat, but this is what we're going to mount out for the NASA shoot. And it's got like an IR laser on the bottom. It's like nitrogen housed, and then all the cables, come through this kind of just sleeve. But we're going to test this out on the beach and see if it survives. But this, once again, is just an Ethernet cable is all you need. At PoE. And then you can control it, get the stream, and manipulate it however you want.
That is super cool.
So,
all right. Does anybody from the class have any questions? Go ahead. Do I have to unmute you, or can you unmute? Yep,
I got it. So kind of like the first, like I have a question and then like kind of a follow-up question.
Yep.
My first thought, like when you were describing the different like workflows you could do with this, would be like a security system kind of workflow. And with that, do your cameras offer like a night vision or like a night style? And then like what kind of like workflow would you need for that? Like to do a security system style?
Yeah, and I'll open a picture to show you because I don't have my IR ones plugged in. But yes, like on our mid to upper range, there's an IR filter which takes it to black, or color to black and white. on this outdoor one, it'll actually shoot out a laser so that it'll illuminate basically things like 100, 200 feet in front of it. It's pretty crazy. I'll pull up a picture here as I'm talking. Let me pull this back over. Sorry, I stopped sharing my screen. This is like utilizing the night vision, and this is outside that our other sales engineer was doing. And you can see it's on his patio. So people are kind of utilizing this, and he was also able to use the tracking software when it was nighttime like this. Granted, like the bird dog tracking software it's still very primitive. It tracks one person like a TED Talk. So it's definitely not, robust multi-people tracking. We just don't have the time and resources to spend making that. We much rather build the product and then people can take it and run. For security system workflows, yeah, if you have these cameras and you post them up wherever you want, you can pull them into your network on your home. I leave my camera up when I go out for my puppy, and I literally can just pull it up on my phone, kind of like what I showed you guys when I was controlling my camera. And so I could send multiple cameras to if I wanted, and I could actually just select which camera I wanted to look into. So in the security system aspect, there is potential for, that much higher quality video signal. The only thing is, or the only kind of element missing at this point is just someone to have like an auto recording feature, to like maybe if there's movement in the frame, it'll trigger. And that's kind of driven through API, which we talked a little bit about, which on our cameras, it's basically automated programming for like external applications. So like Crestron's a popular thing where you can have like these little touch panels, and that can talk to bird dog devices specifically, but it's over that IP workflow. And so I think for a security system, you would just need to have something figured out to auto record that content, unless you have the biggest hard drive in the world and you're good to just leave it running all the time, right? Because the quality is a lot better. It's going to be a little bit bigger than a security camera. Because I like in my parking garage in my apartment, I remember there was one time someone like stole something and there was a security camera. The person walked literally right in front of the camera to the left, and they took a screenshot, and I couldn't even see the person's face. Like it was that bad quality. So I was like, what is even the point of these things?
So
but
now,
yeah,
when you mentioned earlier, like as far as like the signal and such, like when you start adding all kinds of different signals, did you say like a 1 gig would be good for like 7 and below signals?
yes. So if you're doing like 1080p, and it depends on the frame rate and the resolution. So if you're doing like 1080p 60, each of those is like 120 megabits. So that's, getting you up to close to like 800. And we want to leave ourselves some breathing room for if there's like spikes or something like that. So that's kind of just the rule of thumb for, remember, full bandwidth NDI. And then if I had NDI HX, which that's another thing you could do with security cameras, you could pull a bunch of those, because those can be like 6 megabit signals. And then it'll look kind of like a Zoom call, more so in quality, which is still better than most security cameras, because those things I think record at probably like 1 megabit per second. Yeah. So does that answer your question?
Yeah, definitely. Appreciate it. Thank you.
Go ahead.
Yes.
We use an NDI setup at the church I work at, and one of the problems I've been having with it is, as far as like manual control of the PTZ cameras, is the joystick is really just not sensitive enough for the kind of stuff that I do. Do you know if like investing in like a higher end controller or higher end PTZ cameras would alleviate that, or is there kind of an upper limit on how tight of a control you can have with those?
Do you know the camera and controller by chance?
I know the controller is Sony IP10, I think is what it's called. I don't remember the exact term for it.
That's touchy.
Yeah. So does it like are there like higher end controllers that would improve?
Oh, that's like that's kind of like almost the retro one. Yeah, that's a pretty primitive. That's in like I think the BRC line, which that was a huge. Most of the church installs that I've personally done myself, like freelance on the side, I'm replacing those systems, to be honest. That they were good 5 years ago when they came out. But yeah, as far as the control, like something like our stick is a lot more precise in terms of like you can kind of get that slow, gradual movement. And I don't know why I didn't plug it in.
Well, yours are more sensitive, right? So like when you push, it goes harder, faster, slower.
There's a threshold, right?
Yes.
For like if you barely push it over. And what I was going to show is it correlates to like on this joystick even, like if I barely click this, I'm like barely moving, right? And then if I take it all the way over, there is like a speed ramp feature in that. And so yeah, with like Panasonic has great controllers, and then our Bird Dog controller is solid for the control. Sony is probably third in that race, and then there's like the PTZ Optic Superjoy. But yeah, they've definitely come a long way in the past, I would say 1 to 2 years, as far as touchiness. Because yeah, when they came out, people were like, I'm gonna do all these cool live moves, and they like barely move and it just flies over, right? So usually you kind of have to rely on those preset shots, which that kind of works great for most iterations, is like, shooting for your church, the pastor, the worship team, punching those presets. But yeah, as far as the technology that comes into the joysticks, that's evolved a lot over the past year or two.
And even Xbox controllers work pretty good too.
Yep, I have one that sits on my desk here, and so I'll plug that guy in, which let's see, as we're talking, I'll plug it in, and so I can utilize that to control if I want as well.
Yep.
Is that an Xbox controller?
Yep.
Huh.
Because they're Bluetooth, so you can plug them in and they'll talk through the NDI software.
Well, so I'll restart this real quick.
Just so you know, you're not screen sharing, so we don't see your pan.
I'm sorry. 1 second. I was plugging it in, but yeah, you can utilize different devices. So here, I'll screen share now. Sorry about that. Okay, if I right click and I go to settings, PTZ settings, there's controller, Xbox One for Windows, and then now, and then this is my zoom. So yeah, you can. I've had people that have switched full shows on Xbox controllers on something like vMix. They'll do like camera 1, 2, 3, 4, cut, fade. I'm personally a big fan of just like regular keyboards. But there's and people will use Stream Deck is another thing, which actually I would suggest maybe the Stream Deck control is not bad. You could, if your church or something has that, you can even use things like the PTZ Companion to control PTZs with that as well.
Yeah, for a lot of the priests who are 80 and 90 years old, I went to Xbox control because it was a lot simpler for them than having that big, complicated joystick thing in front of them.
Yeah, and then the joystick, it's definitely not as smooth as I can get that slow movement. You can see, Ben. So off my Xbox controller. So maybe you can well, it depends on the camera, but
yeah.
If it does NDI control is what you're looking for. That NDI IP control is what Studio Monitor uses to move it around. But you can try bringing if you have an Xbox controller, bring it up on a Sunday and try it out.
Yep. I might look into that. I mean, it looks smoother than what I've been working with, because it's like you said, the presets work fine. It's just, man, I need that tight control sometimes.
Yep, absolutely.
Well, if there are no other questions, then thank you very much, CJ, for talking to our class. It was an awesome lecture.